Welcome back to part 2 of the oil pastel video tutorial brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. When last left you, we were adding a little bit of yellow green to the apple. That's going to make it look a little bit more natural. Now I'm going to go back over it and I'm going to get a little bit heavier with my highlights at this point. I've built up the oil pastels to a point where the material is real thick on the surface and I have a little bit more freedom to put those highlights on there with some heavy white. So I'm going to put some of those heavy highlights on there. I'm also going to take the white and bring it down and let some of the colors underneath blend with the white. That's going to give us a little bit more of a highlighted side. It's going to make our midtones feel a little bit more natural and make the transition from the highlights to the shadows a little bit more natural as well. Some of those highlights need to be completely white to make the apple look shiny. Now before we go any further, I'm going to add the stem. I'm going to do that by taking the dark brown, drawing out the shape. I'm going to take a little bit of blue. Remember, we're not using black, using blue and brown to mix that black. And then I'll also probably hit it with a little bit of a highlight on the opposite side. And I'm going to incorporate this same yellow, this bright lemon yellow, in some of the other areas as well, just to make it a little bit more consistent. Now I'm also going to draw the surface that the apple is on at this point, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre for that. This is the point where you start to define the outline of the apple, or whatever object you're drawing. Before I wasn't too concerned about the edges, getting them perfect. You can see up there at the top of the apple it's still very loose. When I go back in with the background, I'm going to let these edges be defined by the color that I put around. So right now that color is a yellow ochre. And I'm going to go all the way up to the edge of the apple. Let some of the colors mix a little bit on the edge. Because when we see things with a little bit of blur around the edge. We're seeing with two eyes. And when we look with two eyes, we're looking from actually two different angles at the same time. That makes things a little bit blurry on the edge. So when people are painting, you kind of want to avoid having real sharp edges. And this is the case here with our apple. We don't want to have real sharp edges. Instead, we want those edges to be just slightly blurry. That'll make it appear more natural. I'm not going to finish out my background too far off to the edge, just to give you a little indication of what's below the apple. Now I'm going to put a little bit of shadow underneath the apple. I'm going to do this with the brown first. So again, this is our dark brown. Light source is coming from the left side, so the shadow is going to be on the right side. It'll fade out the further away from the apple you get, and it'll be more intense directly underneath the apple. And I'm going to intensify that shadow a little bit with the blue. Remember, no black, blue and brown. And remember, this is a cast shadow. There are different types of shadow. This is a cast shadow. Cast shadows are created when an object blocks the light from hitting another surface. So in this case, the apple is blocking the light from hitting the surface of the table. Okay, now I'm going to start to give you a little indication of the background. We're going to use this light blue, and these colors might seem a little bit random, but I chose the blue and the yellow ochre. The apple is red. Red, yellow, and blue is a primary color scheme, so they're not completely at random. I did think a little bit about my color theory. And again, just like we did on the table, we're defining the edge of that apple now with the color that we're putting in the background. Now this is one major difference between oil pastels and chalk pastels. With chalk pastels, you probably want to do a lot of the background first and then move to the foreground. Where with oil pastels, it's a little bit backwards, in my opinion. I think you're better suited to do the objects that are in the foreground and work your way back. That way you can be defining those lines as you go back, just like we're doing here with our apple. Alright, now we don't want to just have solid color taken right out of the tube, so to speak. So I'm going to mix these colors a little bit, make them look a little bit more natural. That'll also intensify our shadow. So I'm going to take a little bit of white, and I'm going to be very loose with this. I don't want to create a drawing where we lose the fact that this is a drawing. So I'm going to kind of keep my lines going in different directions so that we can still see those lines. So it has that painterly quality about it. Keeping it real loose. Alright, we'll do the same thing in the background. Now you see I'm getting a little bit of color from my table in the background. Get rid of that. You can just take your finger and clean off the oil pastel. You can take a sharp blade and scratch some of the color off. A little bit of mixing is not necessarily a bad thing. It will help you create a little bit of harmony having some of the colors in different areas. And I'm going to let my lines do the same thing I did on the table in the background. They're going to go in different directions. Keep it loose. Keep that painterly quality about the drawing. And with just a couple more touch-ups, we're done with the apple. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com.